Hello, this is a tutorial for using Microsoft Excel and entering data as well as graphing, which will include a bar graph with error bars and a line graph. So, to begin with, whatever data set you have, you want to enter it in a row corresponding with one of the letters at the top. And this will kind of be the format for everything that you do on here. All of your data will be in that layout. So I'm going to go ahead and enter in some random data. Doesn't really matter what scale that your data is. When you go to create a graph, it'll adjust for any magnitude of your data, whether it be small numbers that I'm entering now or numbers that could be in the hundreds or thousands or whatever. Now, one of the great things about Microsoft Excel is that you can find many different statistical and mathematical values without actually having to do much work other than clicking a couple times. So here I'm just going to label a couple of them. First, I'm going to find the average of the data set that I've entered here, and I'm also going to find the standard deviation. And you can type in equals and then the name of the function that you're trying to find, and then it'll give you a certain range of numbers that you can select for the boxes that correspond with the data you want to include in that function. So as you can see, I'll highlight the range of the data and I'll insert it into a box that's a few below that of the data which I entered. That way I don't really have to do much work and I can just figure out the values of that set very easily and quickly. And here's just to show another example. I'll find the sum of this set just the same way that I found the average. You just highlight the entire set and it'll do all the work for you. And like I said before, a very important statistical function to include a standard deviation, which we use for error bars in a lot of graphs, which will show for the bar graph in this tutorial. And as I did there for column A, you can change the width of any column if you're entering a word or a number that's larger than the space they've already allotted automatically. You can do that just by clicking on the little line next to it and dragging over a little bit. So when it comes to creating the graph or the chart, what you want to do first is you want to highlight all of the data that you want to use. So for this, I'll highlight the control and the experiment. As you can see here, I clicked on the column graph and it also included that space for the series under the letter C. So in order to delete that, I'll right click on the legend and it'll give me this window where I can just click on that series which is included, which doesn't have any information. I can just remove it. And then here I'm going to rename the series, the name of the series which I wrote above the set of numbers, and you can just click on that box where it says name and it'll give you the option to select a box and it'll just take the information you've entered into that box and put it into the legend. So here I have the labeled data set, control, and also the experimental data set. Now if you want to insert a title, you'll go to the format and it'll have a whole list of axes and chart titles. You just click on the one that corresponds, whichever format you want to include, whether it be vertical or horizontal. So I'm just going to do horizontal for the X and the Y axis just because it's pretty standard. So I'll just come up with random axes titles. So the total and experimental day is pretty generic. And then for the overall chart title, you insert it the same way as the axes titles, and I'll just name this one Experiment 1. So I'll just make this a little larger so I can more accurately format the colors and the layout of this graph. So you can do that just by clicking on the bar when you're in the menu for the chart, and it'll give you a ton of different selections for colors. So I'll just play around here and just show a couple of them. Now for entering error bars, what you want to do is you want to go over to the chart layout area, and you want to click on error bars, and you want to go down and click on the bottom option so that you can select your own data, and you can input data for one series at a time, and that makes it very easy to manipulate the data for the particular set that you have. So before we found the standard deviation using the function tool in Excel. So since we're doing the control series, we'll select that average for standard deviation, and we'll just put it in the box for applying it above and below whatever value I put in for that set. You can select the cap style for the error bar and a bunch of other formatting styles. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the experimental set, and we'll go ahead and select the standard deviation for that set. Now depending on your data, you may have different values for standard deviation above and below the value that you have for that data set, so it's important that you make sure that you're putting the right one in at the correct value. So that's really it for the bar graph. There are a ton of different options that Excel gives you that you can play around with formatting. I know every experiment won't be the same, and may have a lot more data sets that you might want to include, but it's a fairly simple one, and it'd be along the same lines for formatting. Now go ahead here and put in some data for a line chart. I'll name this series. The series is the same for this chart. Now the data entry is fairly the same for any kind of chart that you do. So as long as you insert it in this kind of generic format, you'll have the opportunity to change the layout of the data in whatever kind of chart you choose, depending on what you inserted and what kind of chart you're interested in using. So you can use the functions the same way we used them in the other one. You just hit equal, type in the name of the kind of function you want. It'll give you a menu, and you can select the data range, and it'll automatically plug in all the data for you and find that value. So this one will just do the average and the standard deviation. go ahead and set the basic line graph. And here I mess up and accidentally select the standard deviation for all my data, which is why it looks like that. But you want to select the data the same way as you would with the bar graph. You want to select all the data in the series I entered. In this case, it's the series titled Control and Experiment. As you can see here, you could switch the row and column data, and now I'll give you a completely different view in that graph. Just another way that Excel allows you to format the data while maintaining consistency in how you enter it, which is very valuable when you're inputting data from Word or any other program. So here I just have the two series, the control and the experiment. As you can see here, switching the row and column will just change the way it formats a series from a horizontal selection being a series to a vertical selection, which is why when you switch the series, there are, in this case, since there are more data entries for each series than there are series, there will be more series when you switch the row and column. And you can rename the series names the same way that we did for the bar graph. You just right click the legend and it'll give you the option to edit the series that are in that chart, and you can just click on the box that you want to insert the name for. So I'll just name this one Experiment 2, and you can insert the horizontal and vertical axis titles the same way. And the good thing about Excel is that it does give you the option to change the values on the X and Y axes depending on the data that you're using. But for the most part, since you'll be using numeric values, you won't have to change anything in that regard. It'll just automatically format the data to fit the scales. So here you can change the colors and the format of the line graph just as we did the other graph. So if you want to show more contrast, or if you could even recolor the lines or the bars in the bar graph. Now if you were interested in using error bars, you could insert error bars for each data point the same way you entered it for the bar graph. You would go down to the menu for error bars and you'd insert the custom ones, and you would select the series you want to enter for and select the standard deviation for above and below the value entered, and it would give you error bars for each data point. And I decided not to do that just because it's essentially the same thing as we did in the bar graph. And also, if you wanted to, another way to edit the layout of the graph is to right click in the area of the chart outside where the data is displayed, and you can bring up a separate window where you can do the same things that you can in the drop down menu, perhaps a little bit more, just if you want to get specific in the layout and the appearance of your charts. But overall, Microsoft Excel is very valuable for displaying data visually, and for research purposes, it's very easy to use, and it just makes things a lot more simple than if you had to do everything by hand.